Gentlemen, welcome back to the shop. Well, we're not in the shop, we're just outside the shop. This week I picked up a little coolant leak in the coolant reservoir of my little bucky, so we'll be replacing that. When I picked up the leak, I went through the whole system and it looks like there's a little bit of a leak on the thermostat housing as well. So I still got the whole new thermostat housing, and we'll be replacing all of that. Other than that, the bucky's got about 300,000, just under 300,000 Ks on it. So I think it's about time. We'll be flushing out the system, replacing the coolant afterwards, and get as good as better than good. So, but before that, let's get into some science.
Right, so how I realized that I had a leak in the coolant system was when I switched off my car. I realized that the water in the cooling system was boiling, but the gauge didn't go to ice. So either the gauge was faulty or something else. So now, if you remember your high school science, you've got a saturation temperature and saturation pressure, which is directly linked. So saturation temperature can be defined as the temperature at which you've put in enough energy into a substance to make it change state for a given pressure. So the saturation temperature for water, for instance, is 100 degrees Celsius at 101.325 pascals. That is atmospheric pressure at sea level. So if you want to have the water boil at a higher temperature, you have to increase the pressure. If you, for instance, if you go up to what's that mountain, the big one, Everest. If on Mount Everest, which is 8,000 and what meters, if I'm correct, if I'm not correct, let me know down below. I've read somewhere previously that I think the water boils at 71 degrees on Everest. So what happens is you've got a pressure relief cap on your cooling system, and that is a, let's call it up, for instance, 100 kPa or 120 kPa release pressure. So you can build up an additional 120 kPa on top of that, which brings down the boiling, takes up the boiling point of water. So the water will then only start boiling at 130 or 140 degrees Celsius if it stays under pressure. So what you need is that, the long and the short is, you need your coolant system to be under pressure for it to function correctly, and that's what we're going to do now.
Okay, so first thing, we need to drain off all the coolant. I decided that I'm going to flush the system. Guys, this is one thing. If you're going to strip it, do the little bit extra just for the peace of mind of it. So I decided I'm going to flush the system before I put in new coolant as well. Going to work on it. We're going to take out the coolant, so we might as well do it properly. So first of all, we need to get all the old coolant out. There's no plug for it, so I have to take out the bottom pipe. Bit of a hassle, but nonetheless, it is what it is. The coolant I am picking up in this container, I'll be disposing of it. I'm not going to reuse the coolant. I know some guys reuse coolant. I tend to try not to reuse fluids in my vehicles. I don't know what's in there. A little bit of sand in there, and that will start showing up your water pump impeller, coolant pump impeller. So I'd rather just replace it with new coolant. So I'm taking off the I've taken off the hose clamps. Now I'm fighting just to get the pipe off the coupling, leaving it to sort of drain. And little tip: open up the cap on the coolant system. Otherwise, you're just going to make a mess like I'm doing here. And so that the moment you take off the cap, it actually releases the vacuum and it flows much better. What a mess, what a mess. Okay, so after we've drained off all the coolant, slip the pipe back on, and now we're just going to fill it with water and add some radiator flush to it. Once you've got the radiator flush in, you can start the vehicle and get it up to normal temperature again. Once it's up to normal temperature and you haven't got any leaks or funny stuff, the specific flush, coolant radiator flush that I'm using, is you have to drive around a bit. I drove around for probably about 20 minutes with it in the car. trying to drive at a little bit higher revs in a lower gear, so you get less wind through the radiator, so you can actually heat the stuff up a bit. Going through the motions of low and high revolution, so you get the water pump working slowly and faster, just to get all the muck loose and get it back into the water that will be draining off when we're done. Right here you can see the little leak once the vehicle is heated up. Okay, so now that we've worked the radiator flush through, we drained that off, the whole system's dry and empty now. And now we can take off the thermostat housing. Now the thermostat housing on this 1300 ROCAM machine, it's bolted to the engine block with 6 bolts. That takes a size 8 socket. There's not a lot of work room, so little 1/4 inch socket set work great in this one, as you've only got about, I'd say, on some of the bolts, less than an 1/8 of an inch throw on each turn, so it took forever to get it off. Okay, so eventually I got it out, got it off and got it out. Didn't look as bad as I expected, but just give it some time. I broke off one of the hose fittings, but nonetheless that's why I got the whole new housing. You can see it's been on there for 300,000 Ks, and just over there you can see the actual leak. The housing, well, the thermostat housing actually eroded away in that section, so you can see that the gasket, the rubber gasket, is sitting right on the edge, and there you can see where the water actually slipped through. So there was a definite leak on there, not a big one, but definitely a leak on there, and I'm glad that I decided to replace the whole thermostat housing along with it. Here you can see just the new thermostat housing. The old one was some other polymer, the new one's some other aluminum alloy. I think it's I think it'll last a bit longer than the plastic. Okay, so the next step would be to replace the coolant reservoir. Not a big job, just take off those clamps, take off the hoses, one Phillips screw and a little clip on the left hand side. One thing you must always try and do and remember, if you're working on stuff and there's a lot of hoses, in this case it's not a big issue, but there was 3 hoses on the thermostat housing that I had to do it, is make sure that you mark them or put them to the side where they need to come on. You don't want to get back in later this afternoon and not be sure where you're going with the right hoses. So just a little tip, even if you have to put some masking tape on there and write on it 1, 2, 3 or whatever the case may be, just make sure that you mark them. Same with cables and lugs and wires. Rather mark them beforehand than fight afterwards. It just makes a hassle out of a job that could have gone much easier. Okay, so now that we've got the old one out, just reinstall the new one in exactly the same position. Nothing fancy, nothing funny, just hook up the hoses again. One thing that I can tell you is on this vehicle they used these spring-loaded hose clamps. It's not a screw tightening hose clamp. I found that if you can get the hose clamp back onto the position that it was previously in terms of location and rotation, that's your best bet of not picking up leaks. The hose already settled in that position, so when you put the hose clamp back in exactly the same space, you tend to get a better seal. When I move them around, I have previously picked up some leaks, and I bet in this one I did as well. Now with the reservoir done, we can move back to the thermostat housing side. The mating face on the block had quite some scale and a bit of caked on rust on there, so that we need to get off before we fit the new one. I started off by giving it a good wire brush, taking my time, making sure that I've got everything out there. Once that was off, I checked for pitting. No pitting on the face, thank goodness for that. And just to make sure that we've got a good flat mating face on there, I used some 360 grit wet dry sanding paper. Just sanding paper, the type that the body shop shoes. So put that on a block of wood and just ran that over the face, or the mating face on the block, making sure that we've got good contact all around. I know, guys, it's difficult to see what I'm actually doing there, but it's massively difficult to film when you're working in a confined space like that. I think in future I might try something else, but it's really difficult to film where you're working if there isn't really a place to even work, let alone get a camera in. Now that we have the mating face on the block cleaned up, we can reinstall the new, well, not reinstall, but install the new thermostat housing. Just wiggle it in, get it into its place. And I reused the old bolt. I didn't get any new bolts with it. What I did, however, is I just took the wire brush and made sure that the threads on the bolts are clean. I did use some Loctite on there. I used the blue Loctite. I don't know if it's going to last in the heat along with the heat, but nonetheless I installed it with it just as a peace of mind. I don't think it's really necessary. There's no real vibration on there as everything moves together with the block. So but nonetheless I put some Loctite on there. I think it'll definitely come off if I have to take it off again, and it won't be seized on. And then just fight it and get it back in place. Once you've got it back in place, I do not tighten all the bolts at once, so I do use a crisscross pattern to make sure that I draw that face flat against the mating face on the block. Basically like when you're changing tires, opposites just go in a star pattern over them, and make sure that you draw everything up square and tight. And there we go, all done and dusted. I filled the cooling system up with water one last time just to check for leaks. It's much cheaper checking for leaks with water than with coolant. So with that, I picked up a couple of hose clamp leaks that I quickly fixed, moved the hose clamps back to their original positions, got them to stop leaking, and everything was in place. Drained off that water one last time and then added the coolant. So hopefully she's ready to go another 300,000 Ks again. Gentlemen, I think with that I'm going to call it. I hope you found this informative. Please let me know down in the comments below, and please subscribe and ring the little bell so you don't miss any other videos. With that, I'm going to call it and say thank you very much, and as always, stay safe.